and I'll introduce the chair for today, which is Danielle Kinan, who's a lecturer in applied social science in the School of Political Science and Sociology at NUI Galway, and a senior researcher with the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre at NUI in Galway. She has an interdisciplinary background in human rights law and the sociology of childhood and youth. Her research interests are in the area of child and youth participation rights and participatory research methodologies. She also co-edited the 2021 Routledge book titled Child and Youth Participation in Policy, Practice and Research. So it's over to you, Danielle.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And hello and a very warm welcome to you all. I think this is a really timely webinar that we're having today. You know, more and more of us are engaged in involved research or participatory research, and really grappling with, you know, how to set up a child and youth advisory group. So in that sense, it's really timely for many of us here today to focus on that process of establishing a child and young persons advisory group at the National Children's Cancer Service. And so what I really encourage, it's lovely to see the names coming in. You know, we've 20 attendees and more coming in. So it's great to see you all here and across disciplines as well. And I really encourage you to stay engaged throughout the webinar. You know, it's great to have this time with Peter and Mitch and to learn from their expertise. So do comment as we go along. It won't disturb either of them, but I will only come to the comments at the end. And also please ask questions as you go along, which I'll draw their attention to then as we come to the end of the presentation. So we have here today Peter McCarthy. So Dr. Peter McCarthy is a clinical research fellow at the National Children's Cancer Service at Children's Health Ireland at Crumlin and UCD. He's currently completing a PhD in genomics of childhood leukemia, and he's also a special lecturer in pediatrics at the School of Medicine in UCD. So Peter is a medical director and a regular volunteer with Barrettstown. He has a keen interest in involving children and young people in research and leading the multidisciplinary group establishing a young persons advisory group for the National Children's Cancer Service. And then, as you know, this webinar is also being delivered in collaboration with Barrettstown, one of the local partners of the DCU PPI Ignite network. And for Barrettstown here, we have John Mitchell, or as you go by Mitch, and you're head of partnerships at Barrettstown. Mitch has worked at Barrettstown for over a decade, holding a number of roles, including that of camp director. He has extensive experience in working with young people and families using a therapeutic recreation model. And Mitch is working closely with the group to support the facilitation and the running of this young persons advisory group. So I'll hand over to you, Peter, to share your slides and to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much, Danielle, for that kind introduction. And hello, everybody, and good afternoon. And thank you for joining us on what is probably a lot of people's lunch break today. So I hope this session is interesting and enjoyable and informative for everyone. And I would really like to thank the DCU PPI Ignite network for the opportunity to present today and share some of the work that we have been doing in relation to trying to establish a young persons advisory group for the National Children's Cancer Service. So I suppose just to give a brief overview of our plan for today, so just building on what Danielle has already done in relation to introductions, and I'm really glad to be able to welcome everyone here today. Then I suppose I might start by taking you through kind of our PPI journey to date, really. The first thing I would say is this is all very much work in progress. We're still learning as we go, and would be really keen to hear of any thoughts or suggestions or ideas that people might have from hearing our work so far today. And I think, you know, I benefited so much from the last session from Luca May and everything she was talking about. And, you know, hopefully we can all continue to learn from each other going forward. Now I'm going to speak a little bit about what our YPAG is all about. And then, as Daniel alluded to, Mitch is going to join us from Barrettstown, and then ultimately finish up with our next steps and where to from here. So I suppose the first thing to say is a big hello, like I've said already, but just to say that, you know, I'm only one person, Mitch only one person from a much larger team actually of people who've been working on this over the last kind of year or so, from the time we first started to think about how can we begin to involve young people in a meaningful way in some of the research that's ongoing in the National Children's Cancer Service. And this is just some of the names of some of the people who've been really instrumental and key in supporting the work that we've been doing over the last number of months. So I think, you know, this question, this statement really, I think, sums up a lot about really what we're all thinking about, you know, how to involve children and young people in what is, after all, their research. And I think that really gets to the nub of an awful lot of what we're thinking about and talking about and trying to achieve and deliver through what we're doing in our efforts. This paper here that I referenced, I think, was something that I refer back to quite a bit, and that I think really helped us as we began this journey and began this conversation in the National Children's Cancer Service. So maybe just to tell you a little bit more about the National Children's Cancer Service, first of all, and maybe to set the scene a little bit about how and where we work. So at present, the service is delivered essentially from the Children's Health Ireland at Crumlin Hospital. Now, ultimately, we will all be moving to the new Children's Hospital on the St. James's campus when it opens in the coming years, and that's why I've included the nice pictures of the new shiny buildings. The National Children's Cancer Service, in addition to looking after all young people between the ages of 0 and 16 years with cancer in the Republic of Ireland, also engages in an awful lot of research projects and research efforts. There are a number of different research partners through all the different universities in Ireland, and different companies and different working groups. In addition to more basic research, the National Children's Cancer Service is also closely engaged in translational research projects, so trying to bring findings from the laboratory to the bedside. We also have a large number of patients who are enrolled on clinical trials as part of their treatment, and that's something we really encourage and embrace through our work here in the National Children's Cancer Service. In addition to the research aspect and the trials aspect, we are also keen to try and see how we can involve young people and service users more in developing service improvements and changes to the services, and indeed maybe trying to think about how we can initiate new services based on their feedback and thoughts. And ultimately, really, I suppose, what we want to try and achieve is this idea of transforming children and young people from research projects into research partners. So we first began the process by trying to bring together a working group. So that's a mixture of clinicians, researchers, experts in working with children and young people, and experts in PPI. And we began to consider initially the different models of how we can involve children and young people in research, and the idea of trying to move up this ladder, going from purely a consultatory basis, or even below that, more of a tokenism, moving up to collaboration, the idea of them being user-led, and ultimately trying to achieve the idea of research being co-produced, where children and young people and researchers are working together. And it's this idea of shared power and shared responsibility. After we considered the potential different tools at our disposal and the different ways we could approach involving children and young people in research, we decided to develop an overarching vision, first of all, about where we wanted to be in a few years' time when we've established whatever we were going to do, and how we would know that we were kind of trying to be successful at what we were doing. So I'd like to share our vision that we came up with as a working group today, first of all. So I suppose it's that we believe that children and young people with cancer should have a voice, that they should be able to share their opinions and be actively involved in the design and delivery of clinical research and services to make sure they are relevant and suited to their needs. And after some discussions and kind of reading the literature and looking at the advice and information that was out there internationally, we decided that the best kind of tool or way to try and structure involving children and young people in research and in service development in our department was through the creation of a young person's advisory group. We were really fortunate to be able to draw on some really excellent resources internationally, both from the Generation O Alliance in the UK and the European YPAG net. And they have a really useful toolkit online to help people like us who are thinking about setting up and running a young person's advisory group. And I would strongly encourage anybody thinking about getting involved in work like this, or thinking about creating a YPAG, to check out this toolkit. It's something we relied on very heavily and are continuing to use in our work. So with all this in mind, and after a lot of discussions, I suppose the first thing we came up with really was the idea that we were happy that we thought a young person's advisory group was the initial way that we should try and approach this at the National Children's Cancer Service. And I think part of the reason for this as well is, while there were many individual research projects or individual service improvements that could benefit from young people's involvement on a one-off nature, we thought that it was more important to devote our time and efforts initially to trying to develop something that's more sustainable and something which will hopefully be embedded long-term in the efforts in terms of involving PPI and children and young people for the service going forward. And that's why we thought that the YPAG was particularly suitable for our needs. So I suppose, how does the YPAG work? So it's a group of children and young people that come together and work together, first of all. They meet with researchers or healthcare professionals who come to the YPAG with a particular question. So asking for their feedback in relation to a research project that they're thinking of starting, or perhaps it's a consent form or a patient information leaflet they'd like reviewed. Or indeed, it may be a group of healthcare professionals who are thinking of changing something about how the ward is laid out, or perhaps there's a new room or a new space that may be available to young people, and looking for their feedback and input into what it may look like or how it should be designed. After the young people have received the input or the question from the person who's attending their meeting, they then go off and work together as a group to try and answer the question. And while all this is happening, I suppose it's really important to remember that it's also an opportunity to meet other young people, to get to work together as a team, to develop skills such as communication, leadership, teamwork skills, but ultimately, and really importantly, it's all about having fun. And I think that's important, that we always try to remember that, involving children and young people in a way like this needs to be age appropriate and appropriate for young people as well. And that's why we're really lucky to be working with partners such as Barrattstown in relation to the work of the YPAG as well. In addition to considering how we were going to interface and work with children and young people, we also began to think about how we were going to work with researchers. How could we find them and engage with them? So we have a long-standing tradition of many different types and forms of research being performed in the National Children's Cancer Service, as I've already mentioned, through the work of clinical trials, more basic laboratory research, and translational research. In addition to this, there are many researchers embedded within the cancer service itself, and many of the professionals who work with patients on a daily basis also contribute to research as part of their roles. And we thought it was important to engage quite early on with researchers who would be hoping to interact with the YPAG, to see the best way for them to be able to interact with us, but also to try and engage and get a sense of what was out there in terms of what kind of things people might be coming to the YPAG with, or what kind of questions they may be asking. So with this in mind, we were very lucky to have some researchers as part of our YPAG working group as well. We've developed a form for researchers to be able to complete to actually apply to attend the YPAG. Similar to the idea of an ethics committee or another committee in the hospital, we're asking people to kind of formally approach us, tell us what their project is about, tell us the specific question or the ask that they kind of want to bring to the YPAG. In addition to that kind of initial piece of information to allow us to gatekeep and make sure that it's an appropriate question for the YPAG, and that they're not being overburdened with the same thing repeatedly, we are also asking that any of the researchers or professionals looking to interact with the YPAG would work with us in advance and work with our facilitators to make sure that any question or any kind of approach to the YPAG is being done in an age appropriate and child friendly manner as well. And I think from chatting to some researchers, even in the initial stages, that's something I think they find quite reassuring actually, because I think it's not exactly fair to expect someone maybe who isn't working with young people regularly just to pitch up on a random day of a random week and be able to get the most out of their interaction with the young person's advisory group otherwise. So I think that's an important thing to consider as well, as how we work with and support the people who are coming to the YPAG to deliver their questions. So I thought it might be useful to share some of the practicalities or some of the challenges and things that we've had to face to date. So the first thing I would say is give yourself double the time you think it's going to take to actually get things going, because arranging meetings, waiting for people to get back to you, looking for different pieces of information always takes a bit longer than expected. And I would strongly advise to establish a working group early on. This isn't something that one person or two people are going to be able to do and do well. It's important to pull on different people with different skills and different abilities, and we're very lucky to have quite a broad range of people working together to try and achieve our aim. I suppose something that's maybe a little bit different to other settings potentially, but we work within the systems and structures in place within our hospital groups, that's Children's Health Ireland. And it was very important to us that we ensure that our YPAG, not only is it embedded clearly in our department within the National Children's Cancer Service, but also that it works for, within the structures throughout the hospital as well. So we were very lucky and fortunate to be able to liaise with the kind of corporate management team and making sure that they were happy and aware of what we were doing as well, and that we had their support throughout everything we were doing as well. Part of this, and following a request from CHI, was we created terms of reference for our group, and they're available if you're interested in them on our website, www.ypag.ie. That's the first of many shameless plugs I'll be doing this afternoon for our online presence. And I think that was actually a really useful process. So we were very lucky to be able to draw on some examples of terms of reference from groups in the UK, for example, through the toolkit I previously mentioned. But it also mentioned we have to very clearly put down on paper what we're about, how we're going to work, and who's doing what. And I think that really helps to solidify things and has helped us to create a very clear framework about what we're doing and how we're going to do it. Once we had created these terms of reference, we then went to the corporate management team, and the executive management team of the hospital, and ultimately we sought their approval and got it. And it was very clearly then that our governance structures were clarified and everyone was happy with what we were doing. For example, the hospital already had a youth advisory council in place, and it was really important that we figured out exactly how our YPAG might work, that we didn't want to be, stepping on anyone's toes, and making sure that we were all doing dealing with questions and topics that were appropriate to each of the groups. Finally, then, we've been working very hard on our timelines to start. And as I said at the outset of this kind of slide, I would just kind of caution and say, give yourself a lot of time, take the time to do things properly. And I think that's something, we kind of agonized over earlier on, thinking, God, it's taking ages to get to where we want to be. But I think it was worth the time to get the right foundations in place, and that, we're in a position now where we're almost finished recruitment and, hoping to start our YPAG with our first meeting in the coming weeks. So I've alluded to it quite a bit already, but I think one of the real strengths of trying to establish a young person's advisory group like this has been the team of people that have come together to help us in relation to this. So it's a really great mix, a multidisciplinary team mix. We have clinicians and healthcare workers from the hospital, along with some researchers from the hospital and from University College Dublin. We're really fortunate to have experts in working with young people from Barrettstown, and in working with young people and patients and people with cancer and their families from the Irish Cancer Society. And we're also really lucky to have experts in working with children and young people from a PPI perspective from DCU as well. And all of us were able to come together as part of the working group and build on everyone's expertise and knowledge in developing the best plan and the best structure and strategy for our young person's advisory group. One of the things I think we're particularly fortunate about in developing our YPAG is being able to work with Barrettstown. And I could spend the next hour or two telling you how great Barrettstown is, but I am really lucky to be joined today by Mitch, who I think will do a much better job at that than me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand you over to Mitch for a few minutes.
Thanks, Peter, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Danielle, for the introduction as well. As Peter said, my name is Mitch. I'm the head of partnerships in Barrettstown, but I worked in the program for almost 15 years. So I suppose I have first-hand knowledge of the impacts of a place like Barrettstown and what it can do for young people and their families as well. But I'm going to share a little bit about who we are and what we do, and then how we link in with the advisory group as well. But I think it's fair to say that very, very early on in this process, back in the initial conversations, it was something that very much interested us, simply because having young people involved in research and the development of services that are geared towards young people can be a really powerful thing, and the outcomes that come from that tend to be very, very positive. And I can say that because even in our in our own program here in Barrettstown, we have been receiving feedback from our campers and our families for years, and it has really helped us shape what the program looks like now and kind of what services we can provide. And I think any new program we decide to venture into, whether it's a young adult program or a schools program or a hospital program, it's generally because it has come through feedback and research that we've carried out ourselves from people who've used our service, who say to us, like, this is where you need to be, and these are the groups that you need to be working with. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides with you as well. And I have a little video about what Barrettstown is then at the end that should hopefully explain it and make it a little bit more clear. So, and I will just share make sure my sound is on to share. Perfect. So just to give you a quick background, a whistle-stop tour of Barrettstown and how we got to 2022. Back in 1994, Barrettstown opened. We were founded by the famous Hollywood actor Paul Newman, and he had set up a residential camp for children in the US. And at the time, there was young people from Ireland traveling out to the US to go to summer camp, which is something that's so common in the United States and across North America. But very quickly, they realized that there needs to be a place closer to Europe, potentially in Ireland, where European children and young people can go to camp and not be traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. So thankfully, they chose Ireland, and then Barrettstown was the first international serious fun children's network camp. So we opened our gates in 1994, and that first summer we served 124 young people. Nowadays, or pre-pandemic, I should say, we were serving about 130 young people every time we opened the gates in the summertime for a camp. So we've grown a massive amount over the last 20 odd years. And as I said, part of that growth has definitely been influenced by young people. And giving us their feedback and giving us their suggestions and ideas, even around the types of activities we should be running, because it's all good and well for us as a group of adults to be thinking about what we think young people need. It's always great to hear from them that these are the services that they want, or these are the activities that they want to do. But when we originally decided to get involved with the advisory group as well, we felt we had the perfect facility for hosting these get-togethers and for hosting these meetings. And as Peter said, one of the objectives is to bring a group of young people together to help them gel as a team so that they get the most out of that group. Because there's no doubt that there's going to be an awful lot of really, really powerful ideas and positive opinions in that group. And it's trying to help people become comfortable with one another so that they feel like they can share, that they feel like they can actively contribute to the sessions once they're going on. And that's something I think Barrettstown can really help with. We have the perfect facility for things like this. Obviously, we have the beautiful Barrettstown Castle, which you'll see there, but we also have a number of breakout spaces, such as our Aladina Centre, our boardroom, lots of different activity areas that we can use as well. And it almost feels like you're in a different world when you come through the gates of Barrettstown and you're here on site. You know, we're only about 40 minutes from Dublin, but it does feel like you're in a different place altogether. And that's something that's very powerful when it comes to serving families and young people, that they not only get a break from the challenges of their daily lives, they also almost get a break from the outside world as well when they come through here. So we felt we had the perfect facility for this. The site is about 550 acres, and you know, you've seen the famous Barrettstown Castle, which is always an attraction for young people when they're here. But we would probably use about 70 acres of the site for our program areas and camp areas. So that's made up of accommodation buildings. We have medical facilities, beautiful dining hall, laundry facilities, indoor and outdoor activity areas, because believe it or not, one of the biggest challenges we face in Barrettstown is bad weather, you know, and trying to run activities outside in the summertime when it's raining is always a challenge. So we have, as I said, the perfect place to be able to host these meetings and to be able to bring the group together and gel as a team. When the pandemic hit, we realized very, very quickly that all of our services were face-to-face and in person. We were hosting families and young people on site, or we were going into hospitals and into schools to deliver our program. And so all of that had to stop. And in a very quick turnaround, we developed a live program called Barrettstown Live, which is essentially broadcasting camp to the homes of families across the country. On another level, it gives us the opportunity to broadcast it internationally as well. We had a camper join us from South Africa to take part in Barrettstown Live, which was a really special thing to be able to do, to be able to serve somebody who's so far away, but still give them a little bit of that camp experience and camp magic, if you like. The program was so popular that we have now designed some purpose-built studios on site where we can actually live broadcast from. I'd love to say that I'm sitting in one at the moment, but I'm not. I'm just in a general meeting room at the moment. But they're much more colorful, the studios. But that idea of being able to not only run camp on site for young people, or run programs on site for young people, that we can also then broadcast it out to their homes as well. And particularly for young people with serious illness who, for whatever reasons, cannot make the trip to us, it's really nice to know that they're not forgotten about, that there's a program there for them as well. And when they feel up to the journey, Barrettstown on site will be here for them as well. We've a brilliant catering service. As I said, we have our dining hall, so we can feed people and make sure that they're well looked after when they're here. A very, very hardworking facilities team, which can help us set up these breakout rooms depending on what we're going to do on a particular meeting, or help us set up the activity areas as well, depending on what we might want to use. And we've tea and coffee facilities all over the site as well. So our philosophy, or what we call it when we're working with families and young people here, is thoughtful hospitality. And that's exactly what we would like to be able to provide for the advisory groups when they're here, so that they get a sense of what that thoughtful hospitality is, that you really don't have to think about anything else except the focus of why you're here, which is going to be to actively contribute to research and services for young people in the future, which I think is a powerful thing to be involved in. Again, just a couple of quick pictures. The building that's lit up there in the evening time is the dining hall, so it gives you an idea of what that would look like. We have an outdoor theatre too, our Barrettstown Amphitheatre, which I'd love to say we get to use year round, but if I'm being totally honest, it's really something you would use when the weather is nice. So it's the summer primarily when we would use our outdoor theatre. But again, it gives us a space, it's private, there's nothing else happening around it for a group to be working in. If they need to get away from the rest of the group to brainstorm, to come up with some ideas, as I said, we have a lot of these areas on site already. And then you can see the purpose-built studios where we can live stream program from as well. So again, the facility is set up to host groups like this. The program is ran through therapeutic recreation. So no matter what age group we're working with in Bardstown, we follow the same program philosophy. What we do, however, is change it to make sure that it's age appropriate. So for instance, the activities we might run or the team building elements we might run for young people, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, are totally different to what we might run for 16, 17, 18, 19 years of age when we're working with young adults. So it's very much age appropriate, and it's geared towards the age group we're serving. And I think sometimes when people hear Bardstown, they might think, oh, well, it's really just for small children. But it's not. Bardstown has a young adult program. We have a teenage program. We run family camp. So there's a huge element to it that covers all different age groups, if you like. But therapeutic recreation is central to every program. And it's a very simple model that we use, but it's based around rebuilding confidence and self-esteem in young people. So our mission statement is to rebuild the lives of young people affected by serious illness. And in order to do that, you have to start by trying to rebuild confidence and self-esteem. And in order to do that, that's where you need therapeutic recreation. So every activity or every task has an element of challenge to it. There's a success that comes after that. And we can guarantee that success by people putting themselves forward to take part. We can make sure that they can access all of our activities and feel that sense of success, which is so important for your confidence and your self-esteem. I mean, we all know that when we've passed an exam or when we've accomplished a goal that we set out to achieve, that sense of success that comes from that, that's really powerful for confidence and self-esteem. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with young people here, is to create moments where they get to challenge themselves and succeed. After that then comes some time for reflection, where they think about what was that experience like? What did that do for you? What did it make you feel like afterwards? And what did it feel like while you were going through it? And all of that learning then encourages young people to challenge themselves again in future. And out of that comes a discovery moment where you discover something that potentially you've forgotten about yourself since you've been sick, or that you've rediscovered or discovered something brand new about yourself that you didn't realize. Now, we don't use that phrase therapeutic recreation when we're talking and working with young people. We just call it fun. And fun is a very powerful thing for young people as well. But in the background, there's a huge amount of intent behind the fun we create. So we don't just simply bring people to an activity and let them enjoy themselves, ad hoc, if you like. We put a lot of intent behind how that activity is structured. What are the challenges going to be? How will young people succeed? And then how does that bring them through the model of therapeutic recreation? So there's a huge amount of intent in the background of the program, but for kids and for young people when they're here, it really does look like fun and having a laugh with people your own age and engaging with your peers, which again, I think is really important in the development of a team and getting people comfortable socially with each other, so that when they're working on projects together, that comfortability nearly transfers over to what they're doing. So it's something that I would say we're very good at in Bardstown, is helping groups of people engage and gel together. And that's something we'll offer to the advisory group as well. In the background, as I said, the campus is staffed by a medical centre called the MedShed, which provides 24-hour medical care when people are on site. And for all intent and purposes, it's a hospital on site. We refer to it as the MedShed so that that name seems a little bit less daunting for young people if they need the service. But it's an amazing facility to have on site as well, and it's a lovely safety blanket for families to have when they're coming to Bardstown, to know that if their child needs anything when they're there from a medical standpoint, we can cater for that as well. So some of the activities on offer, we try to give a broad range of activities to young people when they're here, because it's not enough to simply do the high energy, high octane, adventure-based activities like climbing and horse riding and canoeing and archery. It's also really, really important that we offer the creative activities like drama, arts and crafts, photography, music, and then the outdoor activities such as nature, fishing and mini golf. So it gives you that broad range of activities. So rather than thinking, oh, well, I can't do this or I can't do that, you actually get the opportunity to try everything. And then team building is obviously part of it as well. So we would run icebreakers and team building challenges as part of the program to help young people get to know each other, and as I said before, to help the group gel together as well. So what to expect from Bardstown? I think the best way to explain this to you is just to show you a quick video clip, and then if there's any questions, that we can answer them at the end of the chat as well. So just bear with me here while I play the video. And Peter, you might give me a thumbs up if you can hear this once it starts.
I've heard it said that you can leave camp, but camp never really leaves you.
Every child should have the opportunity to enjoy their childhood. Bardstown is such a special place, it really is.
It gives children a basis through which to survive hugely traumatic experiences, either through illness or bereavement. It's all about a celebration of life. They just help you learn how to become a family again.
The first time we got there, the first thing that hit us was fun. We got to leave our troubles at the door.
It's almost like an extension of their treatment, that it is just a chance for them to just be a child and just to meet maybe other children that are on similar journeys.
For so long they were maybe told about things they couldn't do, and camp you start to learn about things that you can do. I think the thing the kids love to do the most is to laugh and have fun.
Well, it was my time in hospital that inspired me to be a doctor, but I suppose it was my time in Bardstown that inspired me and gave me the confidence to realise that I could be.
Bardstown certainly gave her confidence. It is an amazing charity. It does so much good.
I went into camp a huge worrier. I didn't want to leave my parents' side, and once we went through camp and had the experience of the programme that they run at Bardstown, I came out happy and carefree and was ready to face whatever life was going to throw at me.
When she came back from Bardstown from the first summer camp, even though she was still very sick, she was back to singing and having a laugh again, which was for us fantastic to see, you know.
Because the medical side of the treatment, of course, it's very important, but it's not holistic and it's not catering to their lifelong needs. You know, once they're cured of that tumour, that's it. Hopefully they won't need any more treatment, but life has to go on, and Bardstown is a stepping stone or a step up to help with that. That's something that medicine can't help with.
Bardstown is a miraculous world of wonder and magic, where every tree, every stone, every bird, every building, and every single person is there for one purpose, and that's to make sick kids' lives better.
That's it from me, Peter. I'll just stop sharing for the time being.
Thank you very much, Mitch. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again now. We're very nearly finished. Sorry, now one moment. So I think Mitch was very nicely able to set the scene there in relation to the importance of trying to work with a group or work with people who know what they're doing when it comes to working with young people, to try and make sure that not only is it getting the most out of whatever activity or kind of project you're going to do, but also, you know, it's appropriate for young people and beneficial to them from taking part too. So I suppose after we had put the group together, we had put together our terms of reference, we put together our plan for how we saw our YPAG working. The next thing really, I suppose, we needed to try and get participants. So we kind of went on a bit of a promotions and recruitment crusade over the last few months, it might be fair to say. We have an online presence, so you can check out our website, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And we also developed some posters. So these are very prominently displayed on our outpatient unit, on the ward, and we were able to share them with, you know, colleagues in hospitals around the country who are maybe looking after young people who are no longer attending the Children's Hospital here in Crumlin, but who would still meet the criteria and kind of be potentially eligible to join the YPAG. I think one of the really helpful things that we did in relation to trying to encourage people to apply was we organized an online information webinar. So we used Zoom a bit like we're doing today in an evening a few weeks ago, where we presented to any interested young people, parents and families about what the YPAG was about, what they could expect and what might be involved. And I think probably the most powerful and important part of that webinar is we were really lucky to be able to have previously interviewed and share the stories from some YPAG participants from a generation or a group in Liverpool in the UK. And I think it was being able to hear from two young people and their mother about a YPAG that's working already and what happens there and how they benefit from it and how they enjoy it, that I think really helped to kind of sell the message and to kind of reassure and encourage people to join in and get involved in something like this as well. So that'd be a definite tip I'd have for anyone who's looking to try and do something like this, is those kind of personal testimonies, or, you know, that piece of experience, you know, hearing from the experts by experience is really key as well. So this is just a snapshot from our website, kind of trying to summarize who our YPAG members are for our group. Obviously, different groups will do this differently depending on the population you're trying to capture and the kind of things you're trying to achieve and serve. We are willing to take young people aged 12 to 29 years. Now, I think it's a fair question to say, why would we go that high in relation to age? One of the things we're trying to capture and support is the developing adolescent and young adult cancer service, and that's currently being developed in Ireland at the moment. And we thought it was important to try and capture young people who would fall in that age bracket, but also people who have kind of left that age bracket now in survivorship realm as well. As I mentioned, the young people taking part need to be patients or former patients with cancer, and given that that's kind of the remit that we've chosen to take for our YPAG here. A lot more of this information is on our website, as I previously mentioned. So where are we now? So we're very close to finishing recruitment for our first group. We actually were holding kind of screening chats and interviews with young people this week. We're planning to run our first meeting next month. I suppose building into this as well and using the toolkit that I mentioned earlier is the idea of, trying to build in the concept of reviewing and aiming to continuously improve what we do. And we're very conscious of the fact that most of the work we've done to date has been trying to set up and establish the YPAG. But once we get going, the YPAG are the ones who are going to be deciding on their name, their logo, how they want to run, who they want to hear from, who they want to talk to more, who they want to talk to less, and they'll be really guided by the young people in the group themselves. And something that I think I was struck by from the recent webinar from Luca May as well was the concept of trying to involve young people actually in the working group to establish the YPAG as well. And that's something that hopefully will come from our interviews this week as well. And that maybe there'll be a young person or two who is at a stage in their life where they may be benefiting from, acting more of the facilitator role as well. And finally, I suppose we're continuing to look for new members and interested researchers, and I think this is something we'll be continuing to work on as well. And we'll be happy to chat to other members from the call today or people in future about ideas of what they have in relation to this as well. So these are just some references and resources. I think the slides will be available to everyone at the end of this series as well. Just some papers that we found particularly useful and some resources that were particularly helpful as we work through this, in addition to the ones that I've mentioned already. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope it was somewhat beneficial to everyone who's thinking about getting started like we are as well. And hopefully over time we can continue to share our kind of experiences and learn from each other going forward about how best to embed working with children and young people in this manner going forward. Thank you very much.
So much, Peter and Mitch. That was very, very beneficial, certainly from my perspective, and really informative. And I think you can see that the audience would completely agree, because there's been lots of engagement while you've been chatting and many questions. And you've finished a few minutes early, so hopefully we will get through them all. But I think I'll kind of cluster them into 4 different areas so we can get through as many as possible. And while I'll paraphrase some of your questions, I hope I'll correctly reflect what you're trying to ask. Because there was a number of questions around recruitment, and I think you've, in that last part of your presentation, I think you've addressed that around, how do you recruit and those type of questions. And I won't remember all your names, but someone was particularly interested about it. How do you ensure that the sample is diverse? And I'll just add on to that as well, and a couple of questions there around incentives too. Do you offer any incentives to encourage them to engage? So we start with that.
Yeah, really good questions. So the diverse, I'll take them kind of separately. So the diversity in inclusion is something we've been talking a lot about ourselves with the group, and it's something that we're really keen to try and get right. Now, I'm not sure we'll get it perfectly right from the start, but it is something that we have been thinking about. Some of the things that we had discussed was about trying to approach maybe groups that work with particular communities or in particular areas that mightn't be as represented in kind of, groups as we might see before as one particular avenue. I think we are a little bit lucky in a way in that we're recruiting from a very defined group of young people that we have access to through the hospital network that we work in. And so we can try to kind of, help with that a little bit as well, but it's something that we're continuing to kind of grasp and think about how best we can do that. And I know there's some research in this area now as well, trying to look at more marginalized groups in the cancer community and things like that, and how best we can approach them and engage them in research as well. And that's something that hopefully we'll be able to learn from going forward. In relation to the remuneration question, so this was something that I think is a bit specific to our kind of setting, but the hospital was very clear with us that we could not pay the participants, and that was something that they laid down very early as one of the things that we had to stick to. So we are covering everyone's expenses, so no one will be out of pocket from attending. They'll be provided with tea, coffee, lunch, food, etc. when they're attending the YPAG as well. And we will be providing gifts, maybe some branded materials or things like that going through it, depending on what the YPAG wants. But that was something that we decided, and I suppose we were kind of led really by what the hospital does and how they run their youth engagement as well. But I know there's other groups who do it differently, and I think that's something that's kind of of interest.
Yeah, great. And just picking up on that, so by all means, members of the audience, to raise your hand if you've some additional tips or advice that you can offer, and if you've been through this process, to what Peter shares with us as well. So then there was a number of questions around, I suppose, and the actual running of the group, and which you cleared then at the last segment there, that you're only kind of getting to that point. But maybe it's about how you foresee it working, and around capacity building with youth. And there was questions there around, very particular question actually around, icebreaker games and those kind of activities. I think the toolkit you mentioned is probably a good go-to for most people to learn more about those type of activities. But yeah, just maybe talk to us about two things briefly around how you foresee capacity building with the youth members. And secondly, do you, in terms of the researchers that are coming to you with questions and so on to be addressed, what kind of tips and work do you do with them to prepare them?
So I'm going to defer to Mitch in a moment about his advice in relation to actually working with young people and that idea of icebreakers and building the group. Like, for example, we envisage our first meeting actually not having any external input. It's going to be purely about trying to establish the group dynamic, introduce what research is, but really it's trying to focus on the group and getting it going first. And I think Mitch would be a better person to speak to that in a moment. In terms of how we envisage working and supporting researchers, what we've kind of established is what we've decided we're going to try and do with that researchers after they've applied and been accepted to present to the YPAG is that they would meet with one of the facilitators or even two of them in advance, probably via Zoom, because it's quite convenient, kind of almost dry run how they are going to kind of use their 10 minutes with the young person's advisory group. And then, the hope will be then that the facilitators will be able to work with the researchers and supporting them to make it as kind of child and youth friendly as possible. Not sure what you'd like to add there, Mitch, because that would be kind of something that we're very lucky to have Barrettson involved with in relation to the facilitation of these activities.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing, the first thing I always ask about if I'm working with the group is what age of the group, or what's the age spread in the group, because I think I might have said it in the few slides I was talking about, that if you're doing an activity for younger people, 8, 9, 10 years of age, it's not going to translate into activities for older teenagers or young adults. So we have to be very careful about what we choose to do and what we pick to do. But really, I think in my experience, what you're trying to do with an icebreaker or with a team building exercise is to get a person to step out of their comfort zone. So we call it comfort, stretch, and panic. So trying to get them to step into their stretch zone, but not into their panic zone, if you like. So the quickest and easiest ways to do that are to make sure that nobody has to make a fool of themselves in front of the group, or that there is no activity designed where some person is going to be left out or loses the activity or loses the game, if you know what I mean. So it's something that has to be done very much as a collective, that there's a team task that involves everybody and that everybody participates in. But some of the best team building activities and team building games that I've ran in the past or that we've used in the past really are involve getting people talking to each other and then laughing with each other. And there are so many different types of games you can do and so many different types of initiatives you can do that really that's all you have to do. You just have to communicate with each other. And I'll give you a classic example of one that we use in Barrettstown that we call the blind hike. And you're basically partnered up with a person who has a blindfold on, and your job is to get them to another location on camp. Now, it sounds really simple and really easy to do, but what you find happens in that dynamic is that the two people become totally reliant on each other. And through just a natural activity like that, they start talking to each other. And by the time you've got them to a different location, they've probably spent about 10 minutes chatting. And it's a brilliant, brilliant icebreaker to do because, as I said, it breaks down all of the barriers of communication, because the person with the blindfold is completely reliant on the other person to get them safely to this area. And just through a simple task like that, you automatically get people talking to each other. And you do it collectively as a group so that everybody is paired up so nobody is left behind. So little things like that can be really, really valuable for team building and for bonding and team dynamics is what we would be focusing on. And then when the group are more comfortable with each other, there's a chance we'll open up some of the broader activities like things like canoeing or climbing or archery, when again the focus at the start is getting the group comfortable with each other before you then start to build on that and help them gel together.
Great. Really, really good tips and advice. I'm going to go to a question, and Niamh had a very specific question, so I'll actually just read it out, and I think it's a really relevant question, but no one else I can see has picked up on it. So you're saying, Niamh, do the members of the group receive feedback from the external researchers and the health professionals on what they have contributed to? So that whole important area of feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a really important area, and something from looking at the literature and from attending kind of seminars like this over the last while, that's come through quite a bit actually. And it seems like without that feedback piece, it's very hard to maintain the momentum, and that young people start to lose interest. And that's something that actually one of the young people who attended our webinar from the group in the UK highlighted as well. She said it's really great when you hear back from the people you've spoken to and they say, well, actually, look, after we met you guys, we changed this or we did X differently, etc. So that's one of the things we ask researchers or healthcare providers when they are approaching us to present to the YPAG, is they have to commit to be able to feedback to us. And the researchers that we work with have developed a specific tool to try and capture that in as convenient way as possible to be able to get it from researchers. But the hope will be that will be something then that will be built in. And then something that we had toyed about is maybe after 6 months or a year, is maybe we could try and, instead of having new inputs, you could maybe go back to some of the people who spoke to them previously to tell them, look, we actually went back and we did this differently and this differently, and this is how it has panned out. But I suppose one of the things about feedback, and I'd be interested to hear if anyone else in the audience's experience of this, is it probably takes time. It's not something that'll happen straight away. It'll take a few months or even longer to really see the full effect, I would imagine.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on. There was another set of questions around ethics and really interesting ethics. And hi, Lokamai, nice to see you here. And thank you. You've been very helpful in the chat, giving really clear explanations. But I suppose I just generally just on that question of ethics. So Lokamai has talked about, what standard practice is and the guidelines we should be following and so on. But in terms of your own case, is it that you're going to look for separate ethical approval? Yeah, talk to us about the ethics process.
So yeah, this was something we looked at in detail very early on, actually, as we began to kind of work through the process of setting up our YPAG, and we spoke to our ethics committee. We were lucky to be able to approach them kind of informally, so we didn't have to go through the full process at the start. And we had that conversation about, is this research or is this PPI, and is this is not us using YPAG members as research subjects or research participants, and this is working with them as partners. And our ethics committee was satisfied that we didn't need to get ethical approval to run a young person's advisory group. However, if at any point anyone performs any research where they become the subjects of it, or that any of the output is going to be published in any format, that we would go back and seek ethical approval then. And I think that does kind of gel with what I would have heard from the webinar last time around as well, and how things seem to happen in the UK. But I think as more and more of these groups and more of this work gets done in the Republic of Ireland, it would be interesting to see whether every institution and every ethical committee looks at it in the same way or not, actually.
So you did check in with your committee, and
we did,
with your perspective on it.
Yeah. We thought that was the best way to do it, I think, just to at least have discussed it with them up front, that no one was coming back saying go and look for it retrospectively or anything like that, and they agreed with us on that.
Yeah. And then you can read the comments there, or the detailed information that's been provided there. As in, sorry, I'm talking to our participants obviously here, which is really helpful, because then there is that distinction around some publishing work, but also around then if they're involved, well, obviously if they become a research participant throughout the process, but also if they're very actively involved. I think it was being said around the analysis and those kind of phases, it might change as well, but it's all detailed there, which people can read, which is really helpful. Okay, so then I'm just going to come to two more specific questions.
Actually, in fact, could I jump in? Sorry, Danielle, there was one other thing I was hoping the ethics question might come up, because one of the things we would hope in time is that we would like our ethics committee to put a question in them. Have you spoken to a group of young people, or service users, or people who might be impacted by your study, about your proposal and what you're planning on doing as well? And I think that might be another way of ethics committees in time, hopefully getting used to this concept of having these kind of groups that are available as well to work with researchers in relation to what they want to do as well. And I think it'll be more, the more they hear about them, the more I think that will hopefully happen.
think that's a really good point. And if we've any people in institutions that are members of ethics boards, it should be could be something they'd go back with. You know, they began obviously more recently with more and more questions about GDPI and on ethics. So on, but maybe this is no more than funding applications now. Maybe this is the next way ethics committees need to go in terms of asking questions around this, because it has become more of an ethical issue in terms of just, instead of just take, you know, that they that we really listen to them, give back also. So it's moving into that domain very much so of ethics. Okay, so sorry, I've lost it now. I had a question there from Niamh. So Niamh, you're saying, do you have a cutoff with numbers of young people that can work on the group?
Mitch might be able to speak to this as well in terms of group dynamics and how many. We had kind of in our head thought if we could get 15 to 20 young people on the books, if you know what I mean, that would allow for people who maybe can't attend every week, or not every week, every time we have a meeting, which we envisage to be kind of every kind of 6 weeks or so during term time. But we haven't kind of quite made our initial target number. I think we were happy to start a little bit smaller at the start, and hopefully it will grow with word of mouth. I'm not sure what you think about that, Mitch, in terms of the group dynamic and kind of making it work.
I think you're right, Peter. Like, the bigger the group, the harder it's going to be to have everybody know each other well enough and be comfortable with each other well enough to actively share and participate. And what you don't want is somebody who almost gets lost in the group, you know, and they feel like they don't have a voice in it. And the standard activity group we would work with here is in between kind of 13 and 16 people. So I think if, you know, an advisory group in and around that size would be great to get to, but I also think there's no harm starting it a little bit smaller and making it a little bit more intimate as a group. And then you can always add members to it as you're going forward as well. But I think in and around that, I think anything past the 20 mark, it just might become difficult to manage it, you know.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I'm going to go back to ethics just for one moment, because I forgot to ask Paula's question about how do you maintain the anonymity of the young persons, the YAP group, she says. So maybe that makes sense to you, Peter, but I was just wondering, Paula, do you mean the anonymity of the members of the group, or the anonymity of the research participants, if like that they're engaged in data analysis and so on, where they're actually that may be known to them? So like, does that make sense to you, Peter? Do you want to seek that clarification as well?
Yeah, I think so. How I would have understood that is, let's say, the discussions that happen as part of the work of the group. And, you know, we're conscious of the fact that while we're talking about things in a general way, I imagine some young people may end up sharing their own stories and their own experiences as part of the work of the YPAG as well. And it's one of the questions we would have asked young people in our kind of process where we met them and talked to them about their interest in it and their suitability for taking part, with how comfortable they were in, you know, trying to keep things anonymous, and it's in our terms of reference, and hopefully it'll be something that everyone will agree when they sign up to be part of the YPAG to try to respect that as well. But I think that's a little bit dependent on the members of the group. I suppose I'd be interested to hear if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, and good comments there around ethics in general, around how it seems to be institution dependent. Interesting to hear of your case. Okay, so I'm going to just go to another question. People can read the comments there anyway around, so what models of youth participation do you use in your work is a question here on the Q&A function.
I think we are starting from probably a low baseline. I think we are quite good at consultation. I think that's something that people would have been comfortable with over the years, but certainly within the National Children's Council Service, we wouldn't have had a dedicated approach to involving young people in research before the work we're doing now. Whereas I know Bardstown is something that they've been working on for quite a while, and you guys have your Youth Leadership Council as well. So maybe, I don't know, would you like to share a little bit about that, Mitch?
Yeah, I suppose two models that we would have used in the past, Peter. One is our Camper Leadership Programme, and now we have our Youth Leadership Council, which they're slightly different, even though we're working on ways of merging them together, or at least having one group feed the other group to a certain degree. But the Camper Leadership Programme is for young people who are aged, who've almost, you know, they've been to camp 3 or 4 times, and now they're looking for something different in terms of a programme. And the focus is very much on developing their leadership skills that they can then use in any area of life that they go into. And then the Youth Leader Council is a group that we're engaging with that, again, some are former campers, some are young people who have expressed an interest in getting involved in Bardstown and supporting it in some way. And that group is very much involved in advising us and giving us guidance on things like our carbon footprint and how environmentally friendly we are, the different types of programming we're using for different age groups as well, and just giving us suggestions that are very much relevant to the age cohort that we're serving, as I said. Now, it would be very much adult and youth led as a partnership in terms of what model we're using, but again, it's early stages. We started that program, that Youth Leader Council, just towards the end of the pandemic, sorry, the pandemic is still going on, I should say, at the end of 2020. So we're still new to that kind of working together, but I would say it's probably more of an adult youth partnership rather than being either adult led or youth led, if you know what I mean. But again, yeah, we're kind of at the early stages of it too. But in some regard, for us, we've been gathering feedback and research on our programs for probably the last 10 years, I would say. So I suppose that's the involvement young people have in the direction of Bardstown and where we're going, is that after every session they have the opportunity to provide feedback on not just what their stay was like, but what would you prefer to see more of, what would you prefer to see less of. So from that point of view, I suppose we are youth-led to a certain degree.
Thanks. So I'm just going to finish with one question. Hopefully I've one last question as such as we move towards 2 o'clock. Hopefully I've generally captured most there. As you've asked a number of questions on the Q&A function, and again, I hope we've addressed many of them through our discussion, but just your final one there. And because it came up in the chat function too around publishing in this area, you're planning on evaluating youth involvement. Sorry, but this is more about just evaluating youth involvement and what they got out of it and what could be done to improve it, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, we're hoping to embed this idea of reviewing, that kind of plan, do review cycle, and kind of acting on what the outcome is throughout our work. I think the piece of actually writing it up is the hope in time. Now, obviously, that will require ethical approval then if we start to try and use the information in relation to, trying to publish it. But I think it's useful to do that. And, I think the more people publish and share what they're doing out there, the more we can all learn. I certainly have really benefited from, the information that's available to people to use to try and see what other groups are doing as well. So that would be our hope, I think, ultimately. And the more we all do that, and the more we all share it, I think we can all be benefiting from that in addition to the groups that are running.
Yeah, exactly. A huge thanks to you both for your excellent presentation, but also that was a whirlwind of questions. Great to see the engagement from everyone. But thank you for being so succinct in your answers, but yet informative, which really allowed us to get through them all. To everyone on the webinar, again, thank you so much and for great engagement. There are so many interesting comments there I'd love to follow up on, and even that one from you, Del, around our use of language. I mean, it's not something really I thought of before, but really interesting and good advice going forward. So all that remains for me to do is as the people are doing now in the comments, just to say well done, thank you both, and to remind you of the evaluation form to please fill that in, but also to remind you, that these discussions can be continued within this webinar series. And I think, Stephen, you've just posted when the next session will be held and the details on that. So you'll have that information there. Great.
So people are more than welcome to come along to the next session. And I'll just ask people, I'll send out an email in the next day or two with a couple of follow-up things, maybe answers to the questions we didn't get to, the evaluation form, and perhaps joining our shared learning group. And we're going to meet early next June for, early start of June for a shared learning group. So encourage people to sign up to that and come along, and we'll all try to add to people's knowledge. Yeah, so thanks very much to everybody.
I love the fact that it's in, across disciplines as well, because, no matter what discipline it is, we all have so much learning to share with each other. So, so it's really positive group. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll leave it there.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks a million.
Bye-bye.